what does it say about the Democrat Party when you have someone who was kind of the face of it, who is now encouraging people to essentially walk away and look at being independent?
Well, look, I don't know if people will. I mean, as you know, the US is so incredibly polarised, but the Democrat Party is facing an existential crisis. I mean, it used to thrive by pandering to minorities, but as I just said earlier, there was a swing to Trump from all those minorities. So this sort of coalition strategy that they've used for years, it's just not working anymore, and so they're fumbling around with what to believe in. So, KJP probably is frustrated with the party because it's probably going to be out of power, at least in the White House, for quite some time.
Now, we've been talking about, obviously, the Biden cover-up, and Donald Trump says that the biggest scandal is also the use of Biden's auto pen and using the auto pen for some of those pardons. Now, Trump has ordered Attorney General Pam Bondi to investigate the use of Biden's auto pen. The White House has put out a statement today saying that the nation is governed through presidential signatures. In recent months, it has become increasingly apparent that former President Biden's aides abused the power of presidential signatures through the use of an auto pen to conceal Biden's cognitive decline and assert Article 2 authority. This conspiracy marks one of the most dangerous and concerning scandals in American history. And this is not going away anytime soon. But what can really happen here, Adam?
Well, look, I think that's broadly true. I mean, the presidential pardon power is an extremely serious matter. So you would think the president would actually physically sign these documents, but that clearly did not happen with the suite of pardons that happened at the end of Biden's presidency. I mean, of course, the famous one being Anthony Fauci, who was pardoned, for anything going back 10 years. And there were many other pardons too. And I mean, as you point out, it was exactly the same signature on all of these pardons, suggesting that Biden did not even know that he was pardoning these people. So I think there does have to be an inquiry to work out who on earth was actually governing the US, especially in those last years of the Biden presidency, when it was clear for all to see, for the American public to see, that he was in marked decline. I mean, he could barely string a sentence together. And, people like KJP, who we just talked about, were saying at the time that everything was fine. So, it is a serious matter, and I think that Trump's right to order an investigation of that.
Caroline Levitt was asked about the auto pen scandal yesterday. Here's the exchange.
Looks different. It looks authentic. In fact, if you look at the last name, it almost looks like the president was having a hard time spelling his last name there. Is this White House of the opinion that the only pardon that would count is one that the president signed himself?
It's very interesting. Very interesting props. If you want to bring them to my office later so I can take a closer look, I would like to do that. The president is making a good point when he discusses the usage of the auto pen. Who was running the country for the past 4 years?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because it's strange that Hunter Biden's pardon, the person who was never supposed to get a pardon at all, appears to be one of the only ones that actually has Biden's handwritten signature.
Yeah. No, that's right. And look, I'm sure that was the president's decision himself, despite the fact, as you point out, the president said many times, the former president, I should say, said many times that he would not pardon his son, but he did. That was probably the only one that he was aware of. But yeah, look, it is, it's very sad, actually, because if you take a step back now, there have been so many pardons. This precedent has been set now, I think, that you'll see at the end of every presidency, there's going to be, 24 pardons of people, and that's not really what it was set up for.
Absolutely not. It's extraordinary use of power and, preemptive pardons. Biden, that is part of his legacy. I want to talk to you about Doge. President Trump has officially sent the first $9 billion Doge rescissions package to Congress. So this is to gut funding for USAID, PBS, NPR, US Institute for Peace and other foreign aid programs. But $9 billion. It's no wonder that Elon Musk is pretty disappointed at the moment. It's not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things.
No, look, it's absolutely not. I mean, the US revenue every year is something like 7 trillion 5 trillion. Spending is 7 trillion, revenue is 5 trillion. There's an enormous deficit of roughly $2 trillion every single year. And so $9 billion in the US context is absolutely nothing. And so I sympathise with Elon Musk. He spent months of his time. He sacrificed a lot financially himself to help the US government make savings. And now there's this bill before Congress, which he said is pathetic, essentially, which just increases the debt further. And so there's this token other bill you've pointed out, $9 billion. That's a bit of a joke, really. So, I think we're seeing the beginnings of the fraying of the Trump-Musk relationship, I think, for sure.
Interesting to watch this space. I agree with you that it is disappointing when they were identifying so much waste, and then we're down to $9 billion. But finally, Adam, I want to speak to you about what is happening here in Australia. And that is federal spending on climate and net zero policy has surged to $9 billion a year. So a decade ago, it was $600 million. Now it's $9 billion, and who knows what that will get to. But what value are we getting for this money?
Well, look, just firstly, $9 billion in the Australian context is a lot of money.
Yes, it is.
It basically would be, yes, I mean, it would be the 20th largest program of the federal government. So I looked at federal spending on climate change and net zero, and I was just shocked that over 10 years, it's increased 15-fold and about 400% just in the last few years since Labor was elected. So this is serious money. And, you ask about value. Well, there isn't much because emissions are actually going up. They've barely fallen. Of course, power prices are going up, as you know. So we've got power prices going up, and the government is asking taxpayers for $9 billion a year on, renewable this, renewable that. I mean, it's a disaster, really. It's a fiscal disaster. And so when the government says, for instance, we can't afford to spend more on defence, well, just remember that they're spending $9 billion a year on all sorts of boondoggles for so-called climate change. So, yeah, it's a huge waste.
Adam Creighton, Chief Economist at the Institute of Public Affairs, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks very much.